The objective here is to use parameters to provide different values as input to procedures when they are called in a program. And don't get tripped up here. I'm using the word procedures when typically we use the word function, but we're still learning about how to add parameters. That's the thing that goes inside the parentheses inside of a function. And before we jump into those functions, though, let me mention one thing about algorithms. I was just really thinking highly of myself for coming up with this witty way to remember what an algorithm is. But what I'm thinking is, if you'll just remember the idea of I'll go this way or that way, you should have a pretty easy time remembering what an algorithm is. And then seeing how a heuristic is so similar to an algorithm, just a hurried up example of a heuristic, I just want you to think heuristic. Basically, it's an algorithm that is done really quickly, and you don't optimize it. You don't worry about whether it's perfect or not. It's just something you do in a hurry. That way you can move on with the rest of your programming or function development. Okay, so in this lesson, you'll learn to read AppLab's API documentation, and we'll use functions that accept parameters in order to complete a series of drawing puzzles. These puzzles will require you to make use of the AppLab API documentation to learn new drawing commands. Many of these commands will require the use of parameters, and the final challenge asks you to design a personal monogram, making use of the commands you learned during the lesson. So let's get started with an API. It is a reference guide which catalogs and explains the functionality of a programming language. If a programmer develops the practice of referencing an API, she can make full use of that functionality without undergoing the tedium of memorizing every detail of the language. Think right here, what is an API and what is it good for? You'll need to read through the API in order to find and understand new commands for moving the turtle, selecting colors, and drawing different sized dots and lines on the screen. You should not necessarily understand every command in the drawing API in detail, but you should be familiar with referencing the API as a standard part of the process of writing a program. And you'll see parameters such as move forward parentheses 40. And essentially what that's saying is 40 times you're going to move forward with your little turtle there. Okay, taking a bridge to the rest of the lesson, here is some vocabulary we've used and will continue to use. API is a collection of commands made available to a programmer. Documentation is a description of the behavior of a command, function, or library, whatever, inside of your program. Hexadecimal, this is a base 16 number system that uses 16 distinct symbols, 0 through 9, and A through F to represent numbers from 0 to 15. A library is a collection of commands and functions, typically with a shared purpose. And a parameter is an extra piece of information passed to a function to customize it for a specific need. So far in this unit, we've been exploring programming by drawing turtle art with only a few commands. It will probably not surprise you to learn that there are many more commands included in most programming languages, including the version of JavaScript included in AppLab. And at the end of the day, most programming languages have hundreds, if not thousands, of commands. So documentation helps programmers learn and recall how to use these commands. Your think right share is, do you think programmers memorize all the commands in a programming language? And if not, how is anyone ever able to use an entire programming language? And going from that, thinking how a programmer is a person who can use a programming language, every programmer has to learn by seeing examples of a language being used and reading documentation. In fact, even professional programmers will require reference documentation while designing software. Becoming a good programmer is much less about memorizing a language and more about learning habits of mind and patterns that allow you to use a language, including documentation, effectively. So based on what I just said, what makes a good programmer? Good programmers use APIs. So here is a multiple choice question that you might see on the AP exam. It says, what is an API? A, the idea that abstractions in language get passed down in newer versions? Or is it B, the idea that function parameters should be intelligent enough to know what you want as a programmer? C, a well-documented library of functions provided in a programming language that helps to simplify complex programming tasks? Or D, is it a high-level description of the parameters a function accepts? Notice I crossed out the acronym API in each of these. That way they do not distract you from the actual purpose of an API. And when you've settled on an answer, I would like you to write it out. Don't just write A, B, C, or D. Write out the correct sentence, please. And one more practice multiple choice. What is a function parameter? Is it a parameter, meaning a measure of the distance between a function's conception and implementation? Is it B, a way to give input to a function that controls how the function runs? Is it a collection of commands that can be used in a programming language? Is it another name for the purpose of a function? Or is it a named memory location? And in essence, I think if you remember parameter as this little turtle on a skateboard, what parameters allow you to do is work smarter, not harder. And before we dive into our app lab work today, I just thought I'd share this algorithm of success for you. While you do not have success, try again. And if you're dead, that's when you can stop trying. So let's get to the fun here. I'll explain sections 2 through 4. I'd like to point out that Linux people use man pages all the time for their documentation lookup. But once we go to this link, you'll kind of see what I mean. We're gonna look at documentation a little differently. All right, here we are. It says a new way to move. The move forward turtle command that we've used so far moves the turtle the same amount of every time, 25 pixels in fact. Similarly, turn left turns the turtle to the left exactly 90 degrees. Today we're going to see how some functions can accept input, such as a number, to more exactly control behavior. For example, you can write move forward 103 to move forward exactly 103 pixels. So here's a great way to digest terminology for you. The parameter. When you have a command like move forward 100, we say that the move forward command accepts a parameter, and 100 is the value given or supplied to that function's parameter. Since this value can change, we'll often see a written description for the command that looks something like move forward pixels to indicate that the value supplied to move forward's parameter should be the number of pixels you want it to move. So remember when I said most programming languages have hundreds, if not thousands, of APIs? What happens if you're looking at a function and you don't exactly know what it does? Well, here is where documentation comes into place. On this app lab, all you have to do is hover, and then the description will pop up. And I really like this. You can click See Examples. And so here's even more documentation, which includes examples for you to read. And now when you're all grown up and programming professionally, you will not likely find examples in this way inside the documentation. You'll probably have to go somewhere like Stack Exchange to get them. But for now, definitely utilize this tool, utilize the access you have to the functions documentation. So at minimum, you've completed the puzzles 2 through 4 on that lesson, the API lesson. In conclusion here, I want you to reflect on the standard we are working on today, 5.1. It says here that programs can be developed for creative expression, to satisfy personal curiosity, to create new knowledge, or to solve problems. That is, to help people, organizations, or society. So do you think our exercises today satisfied that standard? Why or why not? The DOL is a free response question. It is said that functions with parameters generalize the behavior of a more specific command. Explain the difference between turn left and turn left with an angle. And I really want you to use the words function and parameter inside your response here.